Crafted Conversation, where we will be exploring themes based around performance in your professional environment. The Crafted Conversation is the voice of the Crafted concept. The Crafted concept considers 3 different pathways to performance within your environment, and they are the learning environment, how we design learning within that environment, and then how we can critique and observe that learning in order to elicit feedback and develop and enhance the learning design and the environment in which it's placed. Crafted concept is wholly based around the concept of teaching and learning and being lifelong learners, and focuses specifically in the education and elite sport sectors. The Crafted Conversation will explore themes across those 3 areas with guests and solo episodes where learning environment may consider the development of identity, of a collective identity and narrative structures within the professional environment that we situate ourselves, cognitive biases, the concept of psychological safety and motivational theory, as well as supporting inclusivity and diversity. Learning design will look to curriculum planning, how we can actually plan for development, supported by research-led educational psychology, research around instruction in both that elite sport and education environment, planning for assessment, and harnessing neurochemistry through ways in which we expect interaction to occur. And finally, learning critique is all about observing. It's about eliciting feedback, giving stakeholders a voice and choice, and supporting diversity of thought to remove the chances of being susceptible to groupthink. Thanks for being with us today on the Crafted Conversation. Time to jump into this week's episode. Welcome back to the Crafted Conversation with me, Marcus Sharrod. This week, I'm on my own and I'd like to talk a little bit about processing and the depth of processing, the depth of ways in which we can engage with learning material and create a deeper sense of encoding into the long-term memory. I'm going to be drawing on the work of Craick and Lockhart to do so. Before I do, though, a nod to the partner of the podcast, Keynote Educational. Keynote are the go-to company when it comes to professional development in the education sector, and listeners of the show can gain themselves an additional 10% off all Keynote in-person or online professional development workshops across subject areas and across teaching all the way up to senior leadership, as well as 10% off a place on their conferences. We recently this week saw Keynote host their first artificial intelligence conference, which went down extremely well. Use the code CRAFTED10, that's CRAFTED10, to get yourself 10% off at the discount via the website keynoteeducational.co.uk. That's keynoteeducational.co.uk. And so back to today's crafted conversation. When it comes to encoding learning material, whether we're in the classroom or out on a sports field, then being able to process visual, auditory information in the moment through the sensory store, the sensory motor store, goes straight into our working memory. Now, we've spoken many times at the Crafted Conversation or through the Crafted concept in my consulting work about the limitations of the working memory. The working memory has an incredibly limited capacity, though slightly different from person to person. Ultimately will traditionally only hold anything between 6 to 10 pieces of information at any one time. Now, in order to go further and embed learning, encode learning to the long-term memory, which we know has an almost unlimited capacity. So it's absolutely vital for coaches, for educators to try and transfer and encode learning from that working memory into the long-term memory to be able to retrieve and draw down on in the future. Then Craick and Lockhart consider the sense of the depth of processing, and that's something that I'm going to give some thought to today. So the depth of mental processing really determines how well information is retained or not retained in that long-term memory. And rather than viewing memory as a sort of something within distinct stages, then in fact, the most durable and retrievable memory traces are those that have been encoded with a deeper level of processing. So what is a deeper level of processing? Well, rather than just taking something at face value or through simple visual or auditory information that we encode through our sensory store into the working memory. For example, something I see a lot actually within my classroom, and this is very natural for the modern learner, is the concept of Googling it or just look it up, search it up. And actually that process has become even more observable since Google do the short summary. So you do your Google search, and rather than just getting a bunch of hyperlinks to different web pages that are supportive of that search engine, you actually get an AI summary or a short summary of what it is that you've considered right at the top. That is the what we would call the opposite. That is the most shallow level of processing. It's taking something at its very most basic descriptive level and saying, yeah, this is what this is. So if I've Googled something like shallow processing, then it's going to come up and it's going to say shallow processing is taking something at a superficial level based on its appearance or its sound and will lead to a weaker memory retention. Done. And the assumption for the learner is, oh, I know that now. But although you know that in that moment, how well encoded is that going to be as a memory trace into the long-term memory? How are you going to sift through that limitless capacity within that long-term memory that's full of S Club 7 lyrics, Manchester United results in the FA Cup in the 99 treble winning season? Nod to United fans. It's impossible. It's stuck there, and it's very difficult to pull back down because the memory trace is really weak. You have taken something at almost a superficial level, and the level of processing is as shallow as it gets. So although very useful, and we see the adverts on the television now that Apple have dropped their sort of AI version on the latest iPhone that's just been released, and we've got the advert where the email summary is being done for the girl in the cafe in the moment who's having a business meeting, then yeah, that's great. That, don't get me wrong, that is fantastic, and I'm a big proponent for the use of artificial intelligence as a time saver, etc. But that is not you demonstrating a level of knowledge or processing that is conducive to someone who has a good understanding or is moving towards having a malleable and versatile level of understanding. And of course, that is what we want from our students. We want them to be able to apply their knowledge in varied, challenging and versatile ways. That's what an exam question is going to do to them. On the sports field, we don't just want our football team to have a good understanding of the patterns of play in possession going from the mid phase of the pitch into the attacking third, because that's all great, and you might practice that within a sort of shadowed, non-competitive environment, and you might do it at high speed, but you're not gaining the wider level of processing of what this looks like on a pitch in the real parameters of a pitch with opposition stood in certain places. And actually those opposition will be stood in different places depending on whether you're playing someone who plays with a 3 at the back with wing backs, or whether they've got a 4 at the back, or whether they play a 4-2-3-1, or whether they're 4-3-3. The different levels from shallow to deep processing of what those patterns look like. We have to, as educators and coaches, create environments in which our learners and our instruction has been designed, the learning design has been created in such a way that we're seeking that application in a varied environment, in a challenging environment, with that desirable level of difficulty. So how do we create desirable levels of difficulty and deeper levels of processing? Well, one, we make effective use of retrieval practice regularly through spaced opportunities for natural forgetting. Take the chance to retrieve that information back from the forgetting curve and allow our learners to apply it in new ways. And actually, by spacing out some of that retrieval, not only are we creating difficulty in trying to remember it and trying to recall it and pull it back from the long-term memory and apply it again in a new situation, but we're also giving our learners the opportunity to re-retrieve that learning and apply new, nuanced understandings because we've taught new elements of the specification, or we've added some experiential element from having played 4 matches. since we did that particular training session on that particular transition from in to out of possession. And we're saying, actually, from an experiential perspective, if we draw on some of the learnings that we had from the video analysis in the game against X, then now when we reapply this transitional, tactical, strategic play, then consider what we learned from that analysis. How does that feel different? And then the beauty is that we can re-encode, having brought that learning, that previously encoded learning, from the long-term memory to the short-term memory, and we're working on it. We're working on it in that moment. Then when we reload it, re-upload it, re-encode it to the long-term memory, then that processing thread has become even deeper. That memory trace is even more vivid because we've added new learning to the previous context. And the same, of course, happens in the classroom because naturally we deliver a syllabus. And this is the main argument that really completely destroys the traditional, if you like, or perhaps misunderstood concept that let's deliver the specification for as quickly as we can, will be finished by the first week of the summer term, and then we can revise. Disproven. I'd actually rather take far longer to deliver my specification because I've naturally, within my curriculum map, taken the opportunity for spaced retrieval, for pulling back on previously learned material, particularly where it's relevant and related to what's recently been taught, and then create an interleaved, interwoven opportunity to mix that learning, retrieve previously taught learning, previously encoded learning, and then elaborate upon it. This is a brief pause in today's crafted conversation to talk about how the crafted concept, the overarching business that supports the crafted conversation, both in newsletter and in podcast form, can best support you in your performance environments. The crafted concept has experience working in the education and elite sports sectors through performance coaching for individuals or for teams, the learning environment, by focusing on those three pillars of the crafted concept of performance: learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly because I can help you, as I have done on many occasions, developing a sense of cohesion within the team. Performance coaching aims to drive individuals and teams to excel. And as a performance coach, I am an expert in areas of teaching and learning, instructional design, motivational psychology, team development, performance culture and environment, and performance mindset. It's my job to generate activities, use questioning, listening, observing, probing techniques to deliberately seek feedback and present opportunities for lateral thinking and inspire growth and ideas for you as an individual or for the performance of the team and the collective. The crafted concept is your accountability partner, is your critical observer. I'm able to draw upon experiences as an expert teacher and instructor and as an expertly qualified executive coach, performance coach with over 100 hours worth of coaching experience. As a coach developer in elite sport, I can support and guide coaches through the complexities of your professional development, of your professional environment, offering structure and assisting you in refining your skills through learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly, marcus@thecraftedconcept.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn, Marcus Sharrod. Deeper processing is all about meaningful connection. And elaboration, as we discussed previously, it's been a podcast episode topic on the crafted conversation. Elaboration is the perfect opportunity to actively engage with learning material and create meaningful connections. So relating new information to prior knowledge, generating examples yourself, applying that knowledge, creating your own questions with your own marking scheme or analysis, explaining concepts in your own words using your own language and semantics, all encourage deeper levels of processing. And ultimately, in any learning environment, so if it's a classroom session for your football team, your hockey team, your rugby team, if it is literally a classroom for my educating colleagues, then reorganizing learning material will help to enhance those long-term encoded retention capabilities. One way that we can really draw on a deeper level of processing and generate opportunities for elaboration is through a sort of semantic understanding of what's being taught. So again, my Google search, my quick Gemini AI summary of what it was that I looked up, that's giving me that shallow level. But I can take an AI summary, which is, again, as I say, I'm a huge proponent for artificial intelligence. I can take that summary, but if I then apply my own thought, my own processing, and generate my own level of challenge and critique around what that summary has produced for me, then I am gaining access to a deeper level of processing. So semantic understanding is literally about taking the words or that you have heard or are written for you and critiquing them, analyzing them yourself. So if my Gemini AI summary tells me what shallow processing is, then I'm going to ask myself difficult, differentiated style questions like, how is that different to deep processing? What might deep processing look like? I taught a lesson this morning where I was asking my pupils to consider the differences between two mental preparation techniques taught on a GCSE Sports Sciences syllabus: mental rehearsal and imagery. Now, as far as our specification is concerned, they're two different things, and one is related to creating visual stimulus that allow you to be calm and relaxed and maintain a lower sense or more optimal sense of arousal for peak performance. And the other one is literally rehearsing the skill components required for performance within that moment. So that's your rugby union place kicker doing their however many steps back they take, or Johnny Wilkinson's sort of classic here, and then imagining striking through the posts. That's the example I always give is Cool Runnings, the film Cool Runnings about the Jamaican bobsleigh team. They sit in the bathtub together and they're doing the course. They're leaning left and right together as a foursome within the bathtub, imagining the course that they're going to run down the bobsleigh track. But by asking my pupils to, what is the difference between, how is imagery different to mental rehearsal? Give an example of mental rehearsal and then describe it, how its desired outcomes are different to that of imagery. Which type of mental preparation technique would be best suited to having just been through, some sort of moment in a game that's created a heightened sense of arousal? So you've been fouled, or there's been a dispute, or something. But by doing that, I'm asking those differentiated styled questions that require a deeper level of semantic understanding. And therefore, my pupils are considering the learning material in a more malleable, in a more versatile manner, and creating a deeper sense of processing. Now, as I've previously alluded to, if we put that within a football context, then that is exactly as I described, the way in which you line up as a team, how, based on your analysis of the opponent at the weekend, who play a 3-5-2 versus your 4-3-3, what's your role as a holding midfielder going to look like playing against that system? How is that different to when you play against a team that match you up from a positional perspective, from a strategic perspective? What's your role going to be in the opening 10 minutes of that game to generate more opportunities for space and to exploit the opposition later in the game? And actually taking that classroom time is very difficult in a performance environment. It's great when we watch the Amazon documentaries and we see Man City or Newcastle or Arsenal, whoever it is, Spurs, and they've got all the time in the world. They've got all the resources in the world. They're professionals in the Premier League. But teams I work with further down the football pyramid, some are limited to 2 sessions a week, plus game time on Saturday. And so often, at this time of year, there's 2 games a week. Through cup games or through cancellations because of bad weather, then suddenly you find yourself playing 2 games a week. Where is that opportunity for learning in a sense that isn't just on the field. And I would argue, as an expert educator, that those that can generate the greatest level of sustained success across a season are those that are creating desirable opportunities for cognition and deeper processing, more explicit opportunities for players to be challenged by their learning and prior learning from a tactical and strategic perspective. They are the teams that will find themselves starting to move ahead of others towards the end of the season. I strongly believe in that, and that's why I'm engaged to do this work with professional sports teams. So to summarize, ensuring that we are really cognizant, really aware, conscious of the difference between shallow and deep processing as an instructor is essential. If we just set a task and expect our learners to be able to go at it themselves, do their own research, and it's very open and does not kind of have a level of scaffolding or a level of worked examples and modelling, again discussed previously on the Crafted Conversation, then what we're doing as instructors is we're limiting the capacity by which we have ownership over what our learners are actually thinking about. Thinking, cognition, processing is the key to deeper learning. And being really careful in our learning design and the types of questions that we want to ask, whether be it in the education classroom in front of pupils, or be it in a classroom or on the sports field environment as a coach, giving really careful consideration to the questions you're asking, to the ways in which you expect your learners and your athletes to engage with their own learning and apply it in more varied and versatile situations, is going to make a difference between whether they are just rote learned and lack understanding. And of course, lacking understanding under pressured environments, either in an examination hall or during a match, means that if the rote ability to apply that learning is disrupted somehow because of the natural messiness of question design, of the fact that you're playing in an open environment and that you've got an opposition that are trying to disrupt you and trying to beat you and trying to send you in a different direction, then that rote learning quickly falls away, and we find ourselves in a position of over-arousal, of dropping in performance, of a sense of helplessness, learned helplessness. Whereas deeper processing becomes more widely applicable. You can apply it in different circumstances. You can be nuanced in the way in which you apply that learning. And that is the key for any instructor, educator, or coach. We want that learning to come from a deeper sense of encoding into the long-term memory, so that that memory trace is retrievable in more active and organic ways than just when X happens, then equals Y. Thanks so much for listening. We've got a couple of weeks of guest podcast recordings coming up in the future weeks leading into Christmas, which I'm excited about. And I've actually got a couple of questions that have come in. I'd like to read this one out. So as I've said previously, any question that gets sent through onto my LinkedIn, into my direct email, you'll find me on LinkedIn as Marcus Sharrod. You can find The Crafted Concept on Instagram and send a direct message, or just email me straight up, marcus@thecraftedconcept.co.uk. Send your question in. If I find it particularly striking and curious, I'll read it out on the podcast and then get in touch with you for your free initial performance coaching consultation with me. So we've already had 2 of those at this point, which has been really great. It's been good to meet people that are out there and engaging with the content. This week's question is actually it's specific to PE, to physical education, but I'm quite interested in it because actually I think my response lends itself more widely to curriculum and learning design. So I've been asked from Anonymous here, Marcus, how do you best think that physical education should be assessed non-classroom standard core PE? So for the uninitiated, core PE would be, put your kit on and you go and you do something active. Whereas classroom is your academic, your GCSE, A-level, BTEC, Cambridge, etc. So it's a great question, and it's one I feel really passionately about, because for me, the education of the physical pertains to every human being. We all possess one body, and that body is going to carry us throughout our lives. Therefore, if we neglect it, if we aren't considered in the way in which we challenge it and approach our physical body, our physicality, then, well, we are literally limiting our lifespan, right? So for me, I see traditional methods of assessment that kind of want you to create, a number, generate a number that says, oh, this pupil is a level whatever, because they've done a few weeks of badminton and a few weeks of basketball and a few weeks of football, I see as irrelevant. And this is where I think this is more applicable to a wider audience than just physical educators. I think that a measure of one's adaptability of, some might call it physical literacy, others might call it athleticism, into different situations through the movement patterns that our body can create at the hip, at the knee, at the shoulder, whatever, is a better measure of our ability than just, could you do a basketball layup? Because ultimately, I'm a PE teacher, I'm a fit individual. I haven't done a basketball layup in years. Unless I was demonstrating one in a class as a PE teacher. When do I do a basketball layup? When did I last do a backhand badminton serve? So, but the reality is, I walk every day. I hinge at my hip every day. I need some sort of shoulder mobility every day. And so that, for me, is a better method of assessment, actually assessing someone's ability to apply movement patterns in varied situations. The other would be, well, what do we gain? What do we gain socially? What do we gain culturally? What do we gain from a character perspective from being involved in sport and physical activity? Which, by the way, for me, is a cultural prerequisite. It's a cultural given as a British citizen, or one that's living in Great Britain and being educated in Great Britain, that we have access to sport and physical activity. And so that sort of heritage, that cultural heritage that we possess, is important. And we can find ways to measure one's character and the way that you apply yourself in those situations, how resilient you are, how you adapt to change. Those things are far more applicable to a human being than knowing whether or not I can do an Indian dribble. So that's my response. That's a great question, and I look forward to being in touch with that colleague for their free performance coaching consultation. Keep sending your questions in. So we come to the end of this week's podcast episode of The Crafted Conversation, also available in newsletter form by going to www.thecraftedconcept.co.uk and subscribe there, or indeed at the bottom in the show notes. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm Marcus Sharrod. We're on Instagram at thecraftedconcept_, and also YouTube, The Crafted Concept, where the weekly newsletter content goes up in video form. If anything today is of interest to you and you want to get in touch with questions, if your question is read out on the podcast, I will get in touch back with you for your free 30-minute performance coaching consultation as a result of your question being curious enough and interesting enough to have been read out and addressed on the podcast. And equally, if any of the work of the Crafted Concept in performance coaching and consultancy with a particular focus on teaching and learning environments, learning design, and how we critique that learning for performance is of interest to you in the education or elite sports sector, then do get in touch. And you can do so directly via email, marcus@thecraftedconcept.co.uk. See you next time.